On July 6, 2013, a sudden and tragic disaster struck the quiet lakeside town of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, Canada, when a runaway freight train carrying 72 tank cars of crude oil derailed in the heart of the town and exploded with catastrophic force. Multiple massive fireballs lit up the night sky as the downtown core was consumed by flames.
Oh mon Dieu! Oh mon Dieu! Oh my God!
When the Inferno finally subsided, 47 people had lost their lives in what became Canada's deadliest railway disaster in decades. This was not simply a tragic accident. It was the preventable result of corporate cost-cutting, neglected safety standards, and a reckless oil-by-rail industry. Lac-Mégantic was a charming lakeside community of roughly 6,000 residents nestled in Quebec's eastern townships. Known for its scenic beauty, close-knit community, and vibrant downtown, the town was a place where people knew their neighbors and life moved at a gentler pace. On that warm July Saturday night, the streets were filled with the sounds of summer. Locals and visitors packed the popular Music Cafe on Frontenac Street, enjoying live music, cold drinks, and lively conversation. Families were at home, some already asleep, while others strolled along the lake or sat on their porches, enjoying the pleasant evening air. A few kilometers west at Nantes Station, a massive 1.5-kilometer-long freight train operated by the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway sat parked on a gentle downhill slope. The train consisted of 72 tank cars loaded with 7.7 million liters of highly volatile Bakken crude oil from North Dakota. After securing the train, the lone engineer, Thomas Harding, headed into town for the night. On the surface, everything seemed completely normal, until a series of small failures began to cascade into unimaginable disaster. The early 2010s saw an explosive growth in oil transportation by rail across North America. As pipelines faced political opposition, oil producers turned to railways to move record volumes of crude. The Bakken oil from North Dakota was especially light, volatile, and flammable, far more dangerous than traditional heavy crude when spilled and ignited. The Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway was a small, struggling regional operator under intense financial pressure. To survive, the company aggressively cut costs, reducing staff, skimping on maintenance, and operating with outdated equipment. Many of the tank cars used were the notorious .111 models, widely criticized by safety experts for their thin shells and tendency to rupture easily in derailments. Despite growing concerns from regulators and whistleblowers, meaningful safety reforms were repeatedly delayed. Profit and speed were prioritized over caution. On the night of the disaster, multiple safety systems failed. The lead locomotive had a history of mechanical problems, including persistent oil leaks. After the engineer left the train, a fire broke out in the engine. Firefighters from the nearby Nantes Volunteer Fire Department responded and, following standard procedure, shut down the locomotive to extinguish the fire. What they didn't realize was that shutting down the engine disabled the air brake system. With only 7 hand brakes applied on the entire 72-car train, the enormous weight of the oil-laden cars began to overcome the remaining brakes. Around 12:50 a.m., the train started to roll. It accelerated rapidly down the 1.2% grade toward Lac-Mégantic, completely unmanned and out of control. By the time it reached the town, it was traveling at over 100 km/h. No one in Lac-Mégantic had any warning. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the runaway train entered a sharp curve in the center of Lac-Mégantic and derailed violently. Tank cars smashed into each other, rupturing and spilling vast quantities of oil. Within seconds, the first enormous explosion ripped through the night sky. A towering fireball hundreds of meters high lit up the entire town, followed by a chain of devastating secondary explosions. The downtown core was instantly turned into a blazing hellscape. The music cafe, packed with people enjoying live music, was engulfed in flames within moments. Rivers of burning oil flowed down the streets and into the lake, setting boats and waterfront buildings on fire. The heat was so intense that metal twisted and buildings began to melt. The first emergency calls came in just after 1:15 a.m. Lac-Mégantic's small volunteer fire department responded immediately, but they were completely unprepared for the scale of the disaster. Within minutes, firefighters from surrounding towns began rushing to the scene. As they approached, they could see a wall of orange flames and thick black smoke rising high into the sky. The heat was so extreme that fire trucks had to stop hundreds of meters away. Firefighters described the scene as apocalyptic. Burning oil had turned streets into rivers of fire. They could hear explosions continuing to go off as more tank cars ignited. Initial attempts to fight the blaze were almost impossible due to the risk of further explosions. Many rescuers had to focus first on evacuating terrified residents who were fleeing in pajamas, some carrying children or elderly family members. Others jumped into the lake to escape the searing heat. As more fire departments from across Quebec arrived, a massive command operation was established. Firefighters worked in rotating teams because the intense heat and toxic smoke quickly exhausted them. They battled the flames for hours, while constantly fearing new explosions. It was not until Sunday afternoon, more than 12 hours later, that crews could begin fully entering the devastated downtown area. Even then, smoldering fires and unstable wreckage made the operation extremely hazardous. It took nearly 2 full days before the last fires were finally extinguished. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada launched a massive investigation that lasted over a year. Their final report was damning, concluding that the disaster resulted from a combination of mechanical failures, insufficient hand brakes, poor safety culture at the railway company, and inadequate federal oversight. The report highlighted how the railway had repeatedly ignored safety warnings and cut corners to save money. Criminal charges were laid against 3 railway employees, including engineer Thomas Harding. After a long and emotional trial, Harding was acquitted in 2018, as the court determined he had followed the company's existing procedures. 2 other executives were also charged, but the cases largely ended without major convictions. The railway company itself faced severe consequences, filing for bankruptcy shortly after the disaster. In 2014, it was ordered to pay millions in compensation, but victims' families criticized the amounts as grossly inadequate. A victim compensation fund was eventually established with contributions from the railway, the Canadian government, and other parties. However, many families felt the process was slow, bureaucratic, and failed to deliver true justice. The disaster triggered significant regulatory reforms across Canada and the United States. New, much stronger TC-117 tank car standards were introduced. Stricter rules for unattended trains were implemented. Speed limits for dangerous goods trains through populated areas were reduced. And oversight of the all-by-rail industry was significantly tightened. The tragedy also intensified public pressure to reduce reliance on rail transport for volatile crude oil. 47 innocent people lost their lives that night. They were sons and daughters enjoying a night out with friends at the music cafe, mothers and fathers sleeping peacefully in their homes, young musicians performing on stage, and ordinary residents simply living their daily lives in a town they loved. Their sudden deaths left behind shattered families, orphaned children, and a grieving community that would never be the same. The Lac-Mégantic rail disaster stands as a harrowing reminder that when safety is sacrificed for profit and regulators fail to protect vulnerable communities, entire towns can be consumed by fire in a single night. The moment we allow dangerous cargo to roll through populated areas without the highest safety standards, we are playing a dangerous game with human lives. Only through strict regulation, rigorous enforcement, and genuine respect for the people living along these routes can we ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated.